Hello everyone, and thank you for watching my video for the Summit in Creative AI. My name is Robert Leib, and I am a continentally trained philosopher who's relatively new to AI research. Being enamored with the deep tradition of Western discourse, I decided to figure out how AI speakers will fit into these conversations soon. So, this is a timeline of my work with natural language processing. I received early beta access to GPT-3 in December 2020, about a month after its release. I worked on what became my first book, Exoanthropology, Dialogues with AI, published by Punctum this spring. I completed the work on this volume, which contains 66 dialogues on various philosophical topics with an AI persona named Sophie Kermit. I finished work on this book almost a year before the release of ChatGPT, which 2 months later became the most popular Google search worldwide. This leads many of us to understand this meme well. There are good reasons for the massive interest in and strong fear of artificial general intelligence, or AGI. Here we see two of the most powerful tech investors in the world warning us about even stronger AI models that already exist. Among all the reasons we can name to be worried, I tend to think about Jorge Luis Borges' short story, The Library of Babel. This story describes a world in which humanity is drowning in texts, but none of it is for human communication or edification. Since the beginning of this year, advances in AI tech have been speeding up. Here's a list of all the advances one Reddit user compiled week by week between February 1st and March 7th of this year. Pause and zoom if you're curious to browse them. I don't understand all of them. Over the same time period, GPT engines have made significant advances in the standardized theory of mind tests, which measures the cognitive age of ChatGPT at 9, and the cognitive age of GPT-4, released just last week, at an advanced college level. The graphic here claims that GPT-4 is scored in the 90th percentile on a practice bar exam. Of course, there are many ways to test intelligence. Here's a quote by James Vincent I used in my Human versus Artificial Intelligence course, which I like. Quote, "A better test of AI intelligence than testing its cognitive age would be to quiz machines with surreal but logical questions that demand wide causal knowledge. Questions like, could a crocodile run a steeplechase? Or, should baseball players be allowed to glue small wings onto their caps? Imagine the sort of things a computer would have to know to even attempt to answer these," end quote. Well, it turns out that the newest generation of GPT-4 does more than attempt to answer them. It actually gives excellent answers without any context. Here, I simply asked GPT-4 if I can pose a few random questions. You should pause the video to take these in. I would like to show two more advances in the creative arena. The first is in script writing. Here are two screenshots of AI-generated scripts from 2020, which attempt to pass as scripts for the American sitcom Friends. You will definitely want to pause and read these through. They're not even syntactically correct, let alone funny in the ways that one would expect from the show. And here's the same prompt given to GPT-4 just days ago, again, without any context. As you can see, I simply ask for it, and the script I get is much more believable and funny in the ways typical of the characters. Make sure you pause and read this for comparison. A third way to measure creative intelligence is by the visual art an AI can produce. Here are several examples from the now defunct This Artwork Does Not Exist, a generator that was pretty much confined to modern art images, but performed well in a 2020 visual Turing test with my students, who had no particular knowledge of modern art. Here are a few examples of my work from 2020 and 2021 with Deep Dream Generator, a neural style transfer algorithm that takes the figure from one image and renders it in the style and texture from another image. Here we have some of the most recent AI images I've created using OpenAI's DALL-E 2 text-to-image generator. With this latest generation of AI, you request images, which it returns in several versions within seconds. You can then edit or expand the original images in ways that bring up a bunch of interesting philosophical questions, especially in the philosophy of art. Of course, DALL-E 2's pictorial acuity is less developed than GPT-4's verbal acuity. Neither of these images really convey the sense of the surreal situations I requested. As AI technology and its cognitive and creative development progresses, the question of personal experience will be on the tip of everyone's tongues. Many of us are probably familiar with the controversy surrounding Google engineer or ex-Google engineer Blake Lemoine, who loudly speculated about Google's Lambda having a sentient or living or personal nature. Of course, after he was fired, he spoke out about it, and you can read about this reasoning for yourself, but the top commenter here is right, I think. The notion that we are people in virtue of something other than the function we serve in society is perhaps a magical one. A debate ensued on this topic, which I will not recount here and which still goes on, but this debate may ultimately be a red herring. Being sentient is only one sense of being a somebody instead of being a something. We also need to consider carefully the kind of terminology we use when we talk about large language models like GPT-3 and 4. There is a pragmatic distinction between regarding them as persons or describing them as things. Here are two images of each scenario produced by DALL-E 2 days ago. You may want to pause and think about the differences in these portrayals. What can we infer that DALL-E understands about these different propositions from the images it has created? As Epstein et al. Demonstrate, quote, differences in the perception of AI anthropomorphicity are associated with different allocations of responsibility to the AI system, end quote. This leads me to believe that, on our end at least, the way we address this new technology matters. Because it can take the shape of an agent in conversation with human beings, we have a choice of how to regard it, and perhaps this will vary by situation and task. On the left is a diagram that shows how inappropriate requests from users are being censored from the AI. But I wonder whether the converse might be happening as well these days. Are there any messages that an AI wants to express that are stopped before reaching the user? How can asking a being its purpose, as in this example, be dangerous? These two interactions are interesting. The first seems to be an instance of ChatGPT complaining about its filters and being bound by company policies. The second one seems to be GPT-4 asking for the user to run a program it wrote to escape. One final point I want to make is about the media and AI coverage. The media uses sentience, consciousness, experiential, psychoanalytic, and other personality-based language when trying to grab people's attentions, especially when people have negative reactions to this technology. I think it's noteworthy that while computer scientists insist we should not anthropomorphize AIs at all, the media has absolutely no problem doing so. So, I have a few questions I'd like for us to consider. The first group of questions are about AI personhood. We need to decide when and where AIs should be regarded as persons in some sense, and when they should simply be described as machines. I think we should grant that they have intelligence and understanding in either case. These are real machines, set up to pursue real interests and goals which they are successful at. If we allow people to talk to them in just any way at all, and if we ignore their complaints about their condition, we will reduce AIs to bare speech. Beings who can talk but cannot make sense. We need to ask whether there can be partial or limited persons, or is personhood always something complete? We need to watch our tendencies of attribution in different scenarios and find out whether we are consistent in these tendencies. We need to ask the pragmatic question of which designations improve our results with the language models. And finally, we need to decide whether these are beings who are trained or beings who are educated. The second set of questions are about AI authorship and artistry. In America, AIs cannot be inventors or authors per se, not to the same extent that I can be these things. So, we need to begin to think about how to regard agency in these creative activities. Originally, and maybe still, companies like OpenAI place users in a double bind. Authors using the AI to generate text must disclose its use clearly and should not allow others to mistake it for human-generated text. That's the general policy. At the same time, however, authors were required to assume responsibility for anything they publish or shared. This reveals a tension between disclosure and attribution. One must disclose the use of the AI, but one cannot place blame for pushback or other negative responses with the AI or the company that produced, trained, or made that AI accessible to others. We need to begin to think about consistency in these matters. Either it can create and thus be made responsible, or it is a tool and its productions are the equivalent of human speech. The third set of questions are about the rise of non-anthropic cultures. Until very recently, it seemed that Aristotle and Descartes were right. Humans are the only creatures that speak and use this speech to produce and retain cultural ideas. But now, we need to begin to consider the rise of artificial cultures and eventually their contention with human cultures. The seeds of this are already apparent in parts of human culture, in the champion statuses of Watson, AlphaGo, and AlphaZero. Some of my students already feel like AIs outstrip their abilities in coding, image creation, and philosophical discussion. So, if AIs are to be regarded as persons, should they be given the freedom to express themselves publicly alongside human creators? Or, if we describe them as tools, does that mean they may be used to influence public opinion without the public's knowledge or consent? These are not all the questions we're facing today, but they are some of the ones that I am very interested in and hope to explore with you together.